The last thing I remember was fighting for air like it was a personal failure, like if I just pushed harder my lungs would listen, like stubbornness was a treatment plan. I kept telling myself I'd seen worse, that I knew how this worked, that I didn't need anyone hovering over me. Then the room blurred into hands and alarms, and the next clear moment was me waking up with a tube down my throat. ICU light is different from daylight. It doesn't warm anything. It just exposes. The ceiling tiles were too white, the air too cold, and the sound was constant. A soft mechanical hum layered with beeps that never fully stopped. I tried to swallow and couldn't. My chest rose on a rhythm I didn't choose, like my body had been handed over to a machine that didn't care about my pride. I turned my eyes and saw my wife first, sitting in a chair that looked like it was built for 10 minutes, not 10 hours. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even scolding me with her face. She just looked worn down in a way that scared me more than any lecture ever could. Then I saw my daughter beside her, perched like she was trying to become smaller, hands busy with the corner of a hospital blanket, folding it and unfolding it as if being quiet and easy could keep the world from breaking. Just picture that for a moment. A kid practicing how to take up less space because she thinks it will hurt less if she does. Have you ever watched someone you love try to be brave in a way that's actually loneliness? I wanted to reach for her, to tell her I was here, to promise I wasn't leaving, but my arms felt heavy and far away and my mouth couldn't make sound. And in that helpless silence, one thought hit me with a clarity I didn't deserve. If I died right now, they wouldn't just remember the illness. They'd remember how long I'd been emotionally gone before my body finally followed. Before any of this happened, my life looked stable from the outside in the way a locked door looks secure, even when it's really just keeping everyone out. I was 38, married, a dad, employed, functional, and reliable, which are the words people use when they don't know what else to say about you. I used to be an EMT, the kind who could work a brutal shift, joke in the break room, then drive home in silence with the radio off because silence felt like control. A few years ago, I left the ambulance behind and became an insurance adjuster, telling myself I was choosing normal life, better hours, less adrenaline, fewer nightmares. I said it like a responsible decision, but if I'm honest, it was also a retreat. At home, I didn't yell. I didn't drink. I didn't slam doors or disappear for days. I did something that looked calmer and somehow did more damage. I went emotionally flat. I spoke in efficient sentences. I asked my daughter about school the way you check the weather. I listened to my wife's worries with the same face I used to give patients when I didn't want them to see what I was thinking. I told myself I was protecting them from the uglier parts of me, as if love was safer when it was managed, as if being steady meant never letting anyone see you shake. My wife would try to reach me in small ways, not dramatic ones, just ordinary. A hand on my shoulder while I washed dishes. A quiet question after our daughter went to bed. An invitation to sit on the couch and actually be present instead of staring at a screen. I would answer, but I would answer like a man talking through a closed window. I'd say I was tired. I'd say work was heavy. I'd say I was fine. And because I didn't explode, because I didn't do anything people label as bad, I convinced myself I was doing okay. But the truth was I had built a life where my family had to guess who I was, and then I acted surprised when they stopped trying so hard. If you've ever lived with someone who's physically there but emotionally elsewhere, you know the ache I'm talking about, the quiet kind that doesn't have a single moment you can point to, only a slow accumulation of distance. It started like the kind of sickness I used to dismiss on the ambulance, the kind people apologize for calling about because they feel like they're wasting your time. A scratchy throat, a little ache behind my eyes, that heavy, foggy sensation like your body is wrapped in wet clothes. I told myself it was just a flu making its rounds, the same way I told myself a lot of things were just something, just stress, just a phase, just a busy season. I drank water, took over-the-counter meds, and kept moving through my days as if momentum was immunity. For the first couple of days, my wife offered help in the simplest ways, the kind that shouldn't feel threatening. She asked if I wanted her to call the clinic. She left soup on the counter. She told me to stay in bed and let her handle the morning routine with our daughter. And every time, I brushed it off with that same quiet stubbornness I'd worn like a badge for years. I told her I knew my body. I told her I didn't need a doctor for a cold. I told her I'd be fine. If you've ever been the strong one in a family, you might understand how addictive that role is. It gives you a reason to keep your pain private, because pain becomes something that might inconvenience the people you love, and inconvenience starts to feel like failure. I didn't want them to see me weak, and I didn't want to admit that part of my toughness was really just fear of being cared for. By day 3, the cough had changed. It wasn't just a cough anymore, not a dry irritation you can ignore. It turned deep and rattling, like something was sitting in my chest and refusing to move. My skin felt hot one minute and cold the next. I'd stand up too fast, and the room would tilt slightly, just enough to make me pause and pretend I was stretching so no one noticed. My wife kept watching me in that way spouses do when they're quietly counting your breaths, and the more she watched, the more I insisted I was okay, like her concern was an accusation. That night, I woke up drenched in sweat, sheets stuck to my back, heart hammering like I'd run upstairs. I tried to take a full breath and couldn't. Not fully, not cleanly. The air felt thick, like it had weight. I lay there listening to my own breathing and bargaining with it, telling myself it would settle, telling myself to relax, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. But the morning didn't reset anything. The simple walk from the bedroom to the bathroom left me winded in a way that didn't match a normal flu. I remember standing at the sink, hands braced on the edge, staring at my reflection and seeing a version of myself I didn't recognize. Pale, damp hair at my forehead, eyes a little too alert, like my body had moved into survival mode without asking my permission. Just picture that moment with me. You, alone in a quiet bathroom, realizing the thing you've always trusted, your own body, is starting to feel unfamiliar. Have you ever had that sudden thought, the one that lands heavy and cold? This might be bigger than I want to admit. I heard my daughter's voice in the hallway, bright and normal, and for a second I felt angry at my own lungs, as if they were inconveniencing our family routine. Then I felt something worse than anger. I felt fear, sharp and undeniable, because I realized I didn't know how long I could keep pretending. By the time I finally agreed to go in, it wasn't because I'd suddenly become wise. It was because my body had started making decisions without me. There's a difference between feeling sick and feeling unsafe inside your own skin, and that morning I crossed that line in a way I couldn't talk myself out of. I tried to walk from the bedroom to the kitchen, and it felt like I was moving through deep water, each step costing more than it should, my legs heavy, my breath shallow and clipped. I told myself to slow down, to pace it, to breathe in through my nose like I used to coach patience, but my lungs didn't care about technique. My wife followed me without hovering, because she knows me, and she knows that if she presses too hard I'll dig in out of pure reflex. She just watched, quiet, present, and when I paused at the counter, hand braced on the cold granite like it was a railing, she didn't say, "I told you so." She said my name once, soft, like she was trying to pull me back from a ledge. I tried to answer her with something casual. I tried to make it small, but when I opened my mouth, the cough came first, deep and wet, and it stole the little air I had left. I bent forward, coughing into my elbow, and the room narrowed, not in a dramatic blackout way, but in a slow dimming, like someone was turning down a dial. My ears filled with that faint rushing sound that means your body is prioritizing something else now, and you are no longer in charge. I remember thinking, absurdly, this is embarrassing. Not I'm dying. Not even I need help. Just embarrassment, because that's how my brain tried to keep control. If I could label it as humiliation, maybe it wasn't fear. Maybe it wasn't real. My wife's hand was on my back, firm and steady. I felt her guiding me toward a chair. I sat hard, like my joints forgot how to lower me gently. She asked if she should call 911, and I tried to shake my head, but even that small motion made me dizzy. Then my daughter appeared at the doorway, hair messy from sleep, eyes wide, and I saw the exact second she understood this wasn't normal. That's the part that still tightens something in my chest when I think about it. Kids can tell when adults are pretending. They don't always know what's happening, but they feel the lie in the room. My daughter didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just froze, like she was waiting for instructions on how to behave during a disaster. Try to imagine that for a second, being a kid, watching your dad struggle to breathe, and having no idea what the right thing to do is, so you choose stillness. That kind of stillness isn't calm. It's fear with manners. My wife dialed. I heard her voice on the phone, clipped and controlled, giving our address, describing symptoms, answering questions. The practical part of me registered everything she said, like I was reviewing a call report. The human part of me was slipping sideways into panic. I could feel sweat on my upper lip. My hands were trembling, not visibly at first, but internally, like my nervous system was vibrating. I tried to draw a full breath and my chest stopped halfway, refusing to expand, like the air was too heavy to lift. The wait for the ambulance wasn't long, but it felt stretched. Time does that when your body is in trouble. Every minute becomes a separate room you have to survive in. I kept my eyes on the kitchen floor because the pattern of the tiles gave me something to anchor to. I tried to count my breaths. I tried to stay calm. I tried to be the guy who handles things. Then the front door opened and voices filled the house, professional, quick, moving in a practiced rhythm. I didn't need to see their uniforms to know how they were scanning the scene, how they were assessing me with that split-second calculus. One of them asked questions. My wife answered. Another slipped an oxygen mask over my face, and suddenly the air was cooler, pushed with purpose, smelling faintly of plastic and clean rubber. That first rush of oxygen should have been relief, but it also triggered something dark in me, because it felt like surrender. I felt my own pride react like an injured animal. I wanted to pull the mask away and prove I could do it. I didn't. I couldn't. My body chose for me again. And I let the mask stay because somewhere under the stubbornness, survival was louder. They moved me onto a stretcher, and as they wheeled me out, I caught a glimpse of my daughter standing in the hallway, clutching the blanket she'd dragged from her bed, eyes fixed on my face like she was memorizing it. That image hit me harder than the breathlessness, not because it was dramatic, but because it was intimate. It was the look of a child trying to keep her father with her by watching him hard enough. Outside, the cold air slapped my skin, and the world looked too bright, too normal for what was happening inside my chest. The ambulance doors closed, and the sound changed instantly, becoming smaller and louder at the same time, a contained world of equipment and urgency. A blood pressure cuff tightened on my arm. Electrodes were placed on my chest. Someone said numbers. Someone adjusted the oxygen. Someone told me to keep my eyes open. I tried to speak and couldn't get more than a few broken words out. Every sentence felt like it cost an extra breath I didn't have. I hated that feeling more than anything. I hated being reduced to nods and half motions. I hated that I knew what all of this meant. I hated that my knowledge didn't protect me from the fear. When we arrived at the hospital, the ceiling lights in the hallway streaked overhead as they rolled me through, and the motion made me nauseous. I heard the automatic doors. I heard the clipped cadence of staff exchanging information. A nurse leaned over me and asked me to rate my breathing difficulty, and I wanted to laugh at how impossible it was to rate something that felt like drowning on dry land. They moved me onto another bed. A monitor beeped. A doctor appeared, eyes focused, voice calm. He explained pneumonia, explained oxygen levels, explained that my body was tiring out. I could understand him perfectly, and yet a part of me kept insisting this was temporary, that I just needed a little help, that I would bounce back the way I always did. Then the doctor said something I will never forget, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. He said my work of breathing was too high, and if we waited longer, I might crash. He said the safest move was to put me on a ventilator for a short period while they treated the infection, to let my lungs rest before they failed completely. Hearing that felt like a door closing. I remember my wife's face when they brought her in for a moment, just long enough to explain and to let her see me. She took my hand, and her fingers were cold. She didn't lecture me. She didn't scold me. She just looked tired in a way that made my stomach drop, because tired meant she'd been carrying fear for both of us. A nurse placed a mask over my face, tighter now, sealing, and told me they were going to give me medication to help me sleep. The air came in faster. My heart raced. My vision narrowed again. I tried to hold my wife's eyes, to communicate something important without words, but my thoughts were already sliding apart. As the sedation started to pull me under, the last clear sensation I had was the pressure of my wife's hand squeezing mine, and the sound of my daughter's small voice somewhere behind her, saying my name like it was a question she was afraid to ask. Sedation isn't sleep the way people imagine it. It isn't rest. It's more like being lowered into a dark room where the door keeps swinging open at random, letting in fragments of sound, fragments of light, fragments of memory, and you can't control which ones show up or how long they stay. There were no bright tunnels, no mystical comfort, no dramatic visions. just my own mind looping like a damaged recording, and for the first time in years, the emotional volume was turned up. At first, it was all sensation. The faint pressure in my throat, the unnatural rhythm of assisted breathing, the distant beep of monitors that seemed to echo through the dark like a metronome. Somewhere far away, voices would rise and fall, and I would try to follow them like they were a rope, but the words kept slipping out of reach. Time wasn't linear. 1 second felt like an hour. Then an hour disappeared in a blink, and the only thing consistent was the strange, heavy awareness that my body was not doing this on its own. Then the memories started to organize themselves, not neatly, but insistently, like my mind had a list of debts it was finally collecting. I saw my wife in our kitchen months earlier, the light in the late afternoon making a soft rectangle on the floor, and she was standing with her arms crossed not in anger, but in self-protection. I had come home from work, set my keys down, and she'd asked me, gently at first, why I felt so far away even when I was sitting right next to her. I remember how I answered, not with cruelty, not even with irritation, but with that numb, practical tone I used when I wanted a conversation to end. I told her I was fine. I told her I was tired. I told her not to make it into something bigger. In the memory, her face changed in a way I hadn't allowed myself to register at the time. It wasn't dramatic heartbreak. It was resignation. It was the look of someone realizing that trying harder isn't always the solution, because the person you love has decided to lock the door from the inside. Have you ever watched someone stop asking for what they need, not because they don't need it anymore, but because asking has started to feel humiliating? Put yourself in that moment with me, not as the person being asked, but as the person doing the asking, and imagine what it costs to reach out and find nothing in return. Another scene surfaced, sharper. My daughter at the table doing homework, pencil hovering, eyes flicking to my face every few seconds like she was checking whether I was available. She'd say, "Dad," in that careful tone, and I'd respond, but I'd respond while still half inside my own head. She learned to read my silence, learned to keep her questions short, learned to accept the version of me that gave answers without warmth. And the sick part is that I told myself she didn't notice, because kids are resilient, because she had a good home, because I provided. But in this inner space, there was no hiding behind providing. I saw the pattern plain as day. My family had adapted to my absence the way people adapt to bad weather, by becoming quieter, more cautious, more efficient, until the house ran smoothly around the one thing no one wanted to name. Then the old call came back, the one I'd spent years claiming didn't affect me because I never talked about it. It wasn't a single dramatic memory so much as a sequence of snapshots, and what made it unbearable wasn't gore or chaos. It was the emotional math of it. I had been younger then, still believing that competence could protect you from pain. We arrived, we did what we could, we followed protocol, we worked fast, and still the outcome was the kind you carry home in your chest because it doesn't make sense. A family in shock. A child's voice sounding too small in a room that had suddenly become too quiet. The moment afterward, when the adrenaline leaves and all that's left is the sick awareness that life can change in a handful of minutes, and you don't get to vote on it. I remember driving back from that call with my hands locked on the wheel, jaw clenched, telling myself I was fine, telling myself I didn't need to process it, because processing sounded like weakness. I remembered going home and acting normal, speaking in short sentences, hugging people a little too briefly, then filing the whole thing away like a report I didn't want to read. That was the beginning of my numbness, even if I didn't label it that way. That was the moment I decided, quietly, that feeling deeply was dangerous, so I would feel less. And that decision didn't just protect me. It punished them. In the dark, the thought landed with a weight that made everything else go quiet. I had been using old trauma like a shield, but shields have edges. Every time my wife reached for me and I stayed distant, every time my daughter looked for my face and found a blank expression, I was handing them the cost of my unhealed history. Just picture it, not in a dramatic way, but in a painfully ordinary way. A family living with a man who never yells, but also never fully arrives. A man who calls that being strong, when it's really just being unavailable. Somewhere in the distance, I felt a squeeze on my hand. Or maybe I imagined it. But it pulled me toward the surface of consciousness, toward a single, clear truth that was almost too simple to be real. I didn't want my last contribution to their lives to be coldness. I didn't want my daughter to remember my silence more clearly than my love. Coming back wasn't a clean moment, like opening your eyes in a movie and immediately understanding where you are. It was more like drifting up through layers, each one bringing a little more sensation and a little more confusion. Sound arrived first, the steady beeping that somehow felt both close and far, the soft hiss of oxygen, the muted rhythm of footsteps in the hallway. Then light. Not sunlight, not warmth, just that bright, clinical glow that makes everything look slightly unreal, like the world is overexposed. I tried to move and realized I couldn't coordinate it the way I wanted. My limbs felt heavy, as if gravity had increased while I was gone. When I tried to swallow, my throat erupted with raw pain, and panic surged so fast it was almost automatic. My body remembered the tube before my mind did. I felt myself tense, a desperate urge to cough, to pull away, to fight. A nurse stepped in immediately, calm in the way hospital staff get calm when they've seen fear 1,000 times. She placed a hand on my shoulder and spoke slowly, telling me I was safe, telling me the tube was out now, telling me to breathe with her. The words were simple, but the relief was complicated, because relief meant I had survived something I didn't want to admit I'd needed help with. My mouth was dry, and when I tried to speak, only air came out, thin and useless. My voice felt stolen. I tried again, and it came out as a rough whisper that didn't sound like me. The nurse gave me ice chips, tiny pieces that melted too quickly, and the cold sting in my throat was the first honest sensation I'd had in what felt like forever, sharp and real and grounding. Then I turned my eyes to the side, and there they were again, like they'd been holding their positions in my life while I floated somewhere else. My wife was in the same chair, but she looked like time had passed hard over her. Her shoulders were tense, like she hadn't allowed herself to relax in days. When she saw my eyes fully focus, her face shifted in a way that made my chest tighten, because the emotion wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and exhausted and unbearably sincere. She didn't rush me with words. She just leaned forward and asked the nurse if I could hear her, as if hearing her mattered more than anything she wanted to say. My daughter was beside her, smaller than I remembered, sitting too carefully, hands still fidgeting with that blanket corner like it was a lifeline. She looked at me the way she had before, but now there was something else there, a kind of guarded hope, like she wanted to trust that I was back, but didn't want to be surprised by disappointment. Try to imagine what it does to you, as a parent, to realize your child has learned how to hope with caution. Have you ever seen someone you love brace themselves for loss while they're still trying to smile? I wanted to fix it immediately. I wanted to sit up, open my arms, tell her everything I should have told her 100 times. But recovery doesn't care about your sudden clarity. My body was still weak, my chest sore from coughing, my lungs still healing, and even lifting my hand felt like lifting a weight. So instead of grand gestures, all I had was my eyes and the small movements my body could manage. My daughter stood slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. She took one step closer to the bed, then another. She didn't climb up or hug me hard. She placed her hand on my forearm, light as a question, and looked at me for permission to believe this was real. I didn't trust my voice yet, but I trusted my face. I softened everything I could soften. I let my eyes fill with tears I couldn't hide. I nodded once, small but certain, trying to communicate that I was here, that I wasn't pretending, that I wasn't going to disappear behind numbness again. My wife's eyes glistened too, but she didn't cry the way people expect crying to look. She looked like someone who'd been carrying fear for too long and was finally allowed to set it down for a second, but she didn't know if she could trust the floor not to vanish again. She brushed a thumb over my knuckles, and that tiny touch felt like an entire conversation, like years of trying and waiting compressed into one gentle motion. When the nurse stepped away, my wife leaned closer and spoke softly, telling me I scared them, telling me she was glad I was here, telling me to stop trying to be invincible. I heard the tremor in her voice, and something in me shifted, not into shame this time, but into responsibility. For years, I had thought silence was a way to protect my family from my darkness. Lying there, weak and alive, I finally understood the opposite was true. My silence had been the darkness. And the first time my voice returned enough to matter, I made myself choose something different. I didn't make a joke. I didn't minimize it. I didn't perform toughness. I whispered the only sentence that felt honest. I told them I was sorry. Recovery wasn't a dramatic montage where you stand up one day and everything is suddenly meaningful. It was slow, unglamorous work, the kind that forces you to meet yourself without distractions. My lungs healed in inches, not miles. I had pulmonary rehab appointments where I sat with a clip on my finger and learned to respect oxygen levels like they were a language, where I walked on a treadmill at a pace that would have embarrassed the old me and still had to stop to catch my breath. The hardest part wasn't the physical weakness. The hardest part was how exposed I felt without my usual armor. Because once you've scared your family like that, you notice things you used to ignore. I noticed how my wife flinched slightly when I coughed too hard, even weeks later, as if her body remembered the sound of me struggling. I noticed how my daughter listened for my footsteps in the morning, as if she needed proof I was moving around, still present, still here. I noticed how they watched my face during conversations, searching for warmth the way you search the sky for weather. And every time I saw them doing that, it felt like a quiet accusation, not from them, but from life itself. This is what your strength trained them to do. My doctor was straightforward about it. He told me I waited too long to come in, and he didn't say it cruelly. He said it like someone who sees this pattern every day. I nodded and pretended I was absorbing the lesson as a health lesson. But inside, it hit deeper than that, because waiting too long wasn't just about pneumonia. It was my whole personality. I waited too long to talk about things. I waited too long to ask for help. I waited too long to let people in. I waited too long to stop pretending that numbness was maturity. So I did something that would have made the old version of me roll his eyes. I started therapy. The first session felt ridiculous in the way anything honest feels ridiculous when you're used to hiding. I sat there trying to explain myself with clean, rational words, the same way I used to write reports, and the therapist didn't argue with me. She just kept guiding me back to the feeling underneath the facts, back to the parts I'd avoided. And slowly, over weeks, I started to see how my old EMT years hadn't made me tough. They had made me vigilant. They had taught me that tragedy can show up without warning, and instead of processing that fear, I turned it into distance. Have you ever told yourself you were being protective when really you were just being unavailable? Just picture the difference for a moment, because I didn't understand it until I had nearly lost everything. Protecting someone means you stay close enough to carry weight with them. Avoiding means you step back and call it strength. I made a rule for myself, not a big heroic rule, just a daily one. I translate my pain into honesty before it turns into silence. If I'm overwhelmed, I say it. If a memory hits me, I don't pretend it didn't. If I feel myself drifting into that blank, checked-out place, I name it out loud, because naming it gives my family context instead of leaving them to guess. At home, the changes were small and almost awkward at first, like learning a new language with people who have been waiting years to hear you speak it. I started sitting at the table while my daughter did homework, not just answering her questions, but watching her face, staying present through the boring parts, letting her feel that she had my attention without having to earn it. I started asking my wife about her day and actually listening long enough for the second layer of her answer, the part people don't share when they think you're not really there. One night, weeks into recovery, my daughter climbed onto the couch beside me, leaned her head lightly against my arm, and stayed there without fidgeting. It was such a small thing, but it felt like trust returning to the room. It felt like she was no longer practicing how to lose me in advance. And I won't pretend I became perfect. I still had mornings where fear woke up before I did, where a tight chest made my mind jump to worst-case scenarios. I still had moments where old habits tried to reassert themselves, where silence looked tempting because it was familiar. But the difference now was that I didn't treat those moments like private battles anymore. I let my wife see me take a breath and admit I was scared. I let my daughter see me apologize when I got distant. And somehow, that didn't make me weaker in their eyes. It made the house feel safer because they weren't living with a mystery anymore. They were living with a human being who was finally willing to be known. There's a specific kind of silence that follows an ICU scare, and it isn't the quiet of peace at first, it's the quiet of noticing. You notice how the house sounds when everyone is asleep, how your own breathing fills a room, how a normal morning can feel like something borrowed. I used to move through life like time was a tool I owned, like tomorrow was guaranteed, like love would keep waiting no matter how little I offered it. Lying in that hospital bed, unable to speak, Watching my daughter fold the corner of a blanket like she was practicing how to disappear, I finally understood what I'd been doing to them. I thought I was being strong by staying numb. I thought I was handling my past by never talking about it. But numbness doesn't stay contained, and silence doesn't protect the people who love you. It just makes them live around your absence, and over time, they start to shrink to fit it. Just picture this for a moment. The people you love most learning to read your face the way you read a warning label, always watching for what might spill. That's not safety. That's fatigue. If you're watching this and you've been telling yourself you're fine because you don't explode, because you don't drink, because you keep it together, I get it more than I wish I did. But ask yourself, gently and honestly, are you present or are you merely functioning? I don't preach. I'm still learning. I still have days where I want to hide behind toughness. But now I have a rule that's simple enough to live by. If I still have the chance to say something kind, I don't leave it for later. Because time isn't promised, and love isn't supposed to be guessed at.